Chapter 10. Just before the 9th hour the following morning, Lhounds and Anmar, in company with their respective Lhounds, were waiting in the antechamber to the Queen's audience room. While they were waiting, Councillor Admeta also entered the room. Her eyes widened as she saw Zendra, sleek coat bright in the warm sunshine pouring through the wide windows, sitting alertly upright in front of Anmar. She gave a cry of delight and promptly plopped down on her knees and flung her arms around the Lhound in a spontaneous hug. "But, child, you have worked wonders with her. I cannot believe the improvement in the dear creature since yesterday." She stepped back a few paces to admire her the better. Anmar smiled. "Yes, she is doing well, isn't she?" and stroked the back of the Lhound's neck. Yes, but thank you to Anmar," came the Lhound's heart-lifting response. Councillor Admeta had barely seated herself next to Anmar when the door to the audience room opened, and the Queen herself appeared in the doorway. She greeted them in her normal courteous and friendly manner, with a particularly warm welcome for Zendra, then preceded them into her audience chamber. A number of people were already seated at the table that had been expanded yet more to accommodate everybody. As they walked across to join them, Lhounds and Anmar saw that there were 4 other people, apart from Scribe Allen, Councillors Padam and Rade, and Colonel Thomas Malek, that they were not familiar with. There were also 2 other Lhounds in the room. As they reached the table, everybody rose to their feet out of respect for Queen Eruda. She spoke to the table as a whole first. "This completes our number for this morning's meeting, ladies and gentlemen, so we can begin. But let me make some introductions first. This is Captain Leonard Denarian, from our Belfane garrison, and Anmar Lanek, who are here as emissaries from my son, and Governor Delon from Keten, respectively. And with them are their Lhounds Zand and Zendra. Let me introduce you to Governor Demito from Gordofane, the commander of the Gordofane militia, Count Edo, and Major Harrod Ram, his second-in-command. And here, next to Colonel Malek and his Lhound Draco, is his second-in-command, Major Nellen Tarek, with her Lhound Star. I have just been bringing everybody who was not at our previous meetings up to date about everything we discussed previously." In the flurry of introductions being acknowledged and everybody sitting down and getting settled, Lhounds and Anmar studied the new people they had just been introduced to. Major Nellen Tarek was probably the most impressive of the 4. Standing over 6 feet tall, she was broad-shouldered and strong-looking, yet vividly female, with a thick curly crop of just off-the-shoulder fiery red-gold hair, striking long-lashed green eyes, a determined yet beautifully shaped mouth, and the flawless complexion that a rare few red-headed people are blessed with. Her Lhound, Star, was a beautiful animal just entering into young maturity, with an alert, almost impetuous look to her, and a rich coppery coat that rivaled her handler's hair in vibrant life and colour. Next to the energetic young Lhound, Colonel Malek's Lhound Draco was clearly no longer young, but his burly body still attested to strength and endurance, and his golden eyes regarded the world with calm maturity. Governor Demito, obviously on terms of close friendship with the Queen, was a competent-looking, portly man with smiling eyes and an easy, no-nonsense but nonetheless courteous manner. It was clear that he approached life and late middle age with wisdom, serenity, and good humour. Count Edo was similarly a pleasant and capable-looking man of middle years, with greying dark hair, pale grey-blue eyes, and a generally thoughtful and intellectual cast to his demeanour. Next to him, his second-in-command, Harrod Ram, was very different, and Lhounds wondered how the 2 men worked together. Ram seemed to personify the very embodiment of the accepted image of the professional soldier. His lean athlete's body was held ramrod straight, and his thin, angular face spoke clearly of a mind as rigorously disciplined as his body. His mouth was set in a firm, indeed somewhat harsh line, and chilly, pale blue eyes seemed to fix an uncompromising, give-no-quarter, expect-no-quarter look on the world around him. Lhounds knew that Zand would send a non-intrusive, imperceptible, and marsh papyrus-down light scan drifting unobtrusively from mind to mind, and he was particularly interested in what the Lhound would make of Ram. At his side, Anmar kept a protective hand on the back of Zendra's neck, but she was starting to realize that Zendra was very capable of holding her own in any company. After some desultory conversation, during which Colonel Malek reported to the Queen that young Dane is doing very well with Marox, and all the councillors expressed their unalloyed pleasure at the improvement already to be discerned in Zendra, the assembled company soon settled down, and all eyes drifted to Queen Eruda. She was leaning back in her chair in a relaxed posture, but there was an air of suppressed excitement about her. When she had everybody's attention, she smiled and launched straight into the main reason for the meeting. "Thanks to this very clever young woman here," she said with a graceful hand gesture towards Anmar, "I believe that the mystery of the missing bamboo tunnels has been solved." As the focus of everybody's attention sharpened, the Queen continued. In a moment of brilliance, Anmar made the connection between the tunnels being removed and the direction of the tracks from that final attack seeming to inexplicably lead into the snow-covered fastnesses. Anmar thinks, and I agree with her, that those bamboo tunnels were removed for the purpose of using them in the fastnesses to provide a way of moving unseen and protected under the snow, in order to gain access to something or some place, whatever that something or some place might be. I know the very idea boggles thought and flies in the face of everything that is logical and sensible, but I feel in my very bones that Anmar is right. A few moments' silence met the Queen's words, then various voices started speaking at once, before all fell silent in momentary embarrassment at the sudden hubbub. The Queen held up a calming hand, then said, No, please do not stop. I want you all to talk about this. Please feel free to speak absolutely openly and at as much length as you require to each other and me. We need to explore this absolutely thoroughly. If there is any other explanation, we need to find it now before we start even thinking of taking any decisions based on Anmar's and now my theory as well, which set the tone for the next phase of the meeting. Discussion ranged freely around the table as points for and against Anmar's theory were debated and argued and accepted and dismissed and re-argued. The Queen and Anmar leant back in their chairs and in essence allowed the conversation to ebb and flow around them. Leonard also sat quietly. He and Zand had already decided the evening before, when Anmar had rather hesitantly laid out her theory for them, that she was correct. He was also still trying to deal with Zand's startling revelation that he, Leonard, was also a spacebender. So far the idea had failed to acquire any reality for him, though it did add to his preoccupation. And inevitably, the meeting eventually came to the same conclusion as the arguments and counter-arguments gradually petered out, and more people fell into a somewhat frustrated silence around the table. Governor Demito finally summed up the prevailing feeling when he leant back in his chair, raised his hands helplessly, and said, Damnation, Eruda, my dear, it makes very little sense, but nothing else makes any better or any sense at all, for that matter, so we are going to have to accept your and the seemingly sensible young woman's theory. Reluctant nods around the table confirmed Governor Demito's concise summation. Leonard picked up the merest whisper of a long-suffering mind-send from Zand. At long last. A quick glance from the Queen and the briefest shadow of a smile around her mouth confirmed Leonard's suspicion that the Lound had included her in his sending. Then Colonel Malek posed the query that was uppermost in everybody's mind. The question now is, Your Highness, what are we going to do about it? The Queen allowed her steady glance to roam from face to face before speaking in a measured tone of voice. I do not believe that we have much of a choice. We have to try and establish what is going on. So to put it simply, I believe that we have to go and investigate. This statement caused another flurry of conversation that, as before, the Queen allowed to continue unchecked. And also as before, it was Governor Demito who acted as the meeting's spokesman once the discussion had run its course. I do believe, Eruda, that as usual you are correct, but of course the practicalities of sending somebody or some bodies to go and investigate are not going to be simple. The Queen agreed. Indeed not, she said, and this is where I now wish you all to come up with ideas as to how you see us proceeding with this undertaking. She leant back in her chair and with an eloquent two-handed gesture threw the subject open for discussion. A fairly lengthy silence ensued as everybody gave the matter some thought. The first voice that broke the silence was Leonard's. Your Highness, if I may presume as a stranger, an outsider, he said in his quietly resonant voice, I believe that the first point to clarify is the size of what I will call the expedition, for want of a better word. Should we be sending a small group, or a larger, well-armed contingent with some defensive capability? When Leonard fell silent, amidst nods from various people around the table, in particular Count Edo and his second-in-command, Major Harrod Ram, a vigorous discussion ensued with a number of differing opinions being aired. Anmar also spoke up, rather hesitantly at first. I think that there are a few other things that we should bear in mind before we start making any decisions in that regard. As the Queen nodded encouragingly, she continued with growing authority. I have been asking myself whether the issue of the tunnels is a matter on its own, or whether there could be a connection with that sender we encountered in Rickle, and that we believe tried to kill us on the Upper Plains Plateau. I also can't get that dead Lound that was found with that last abandoned section of tunnel in the bamboo forests out of my mind. If that Lound was one of the juveniles stolen from Lanatek 2 years ago, then it raises all sorts of other questions for me, the most obvious being, where are all the other Lounds that were stolen at the same time? Is it at all possible that they are being kept somewhere in the vastnesses, utterly ridiculous as that may seem? Councillor Admeta now entered the conversation in her usual energetic fashion. "Not much more ridiculous than the idea of bamboo tunnels under the snow, my dear, and we have agreed that that is the only explanation that we can come up with if we accept that they were taking that last tunnel section towards the snowfields." Councillor Paydam agreed emphatically, as did Councillor Radde, who continued with a distinct expression of concern on her normally inexpressive countenance. "I simply cannot get the thought of that collar with that pocket of crystal paste that the dead Lound had around its neck out of my mind. It really gives me a most uneasy feeling." "I agree absolutely," the Queen re-entered the conversation. "There is something singularly disquieting about the idea." For the next hour the discussion eddied backwards and forwards. Initially, particularly at the urging of Major Ram, the meeting seemed to favour the idea of a small, mobile force that could do a quick reconnaissance and return with their findings. As the discussion flowed, however, this gradually changed towards the idea of a bigger, better armed expedition, as the possible hazards that they might encounter became the subject of anxious and sometimes fairly wild speculation. Halfway into the morning, tea was served and almost absent-mindedly partaken of, as everyone was fully engaged with the problems they were dealing with. After tea, the discussions moved into the final phase. Colonel Malek and Major Tarek of the Lound Regiment in particular made cogent arguments for a stronger force, particularly as the Queen, as Commander-in-Chief of both the militia and the Lound Regiment, would as usual be leading the expedition. It was accordingly decided that 10 Lounds and their mounted handlers, commanded by Major Nellan Tarek, would make up one half of the force. The other half would be made up of a like number of mounted members of the militia, under the command of Major Harrod Ram. All would be armed with stun swords and daggers. The Queen decreed that Leonard and Zand, and Anmar and Zendra should accompany them as part of her personal security detail, which would also include 2 of the senior members of her personal guards. "I will take 2 of my sergeants, probably Menlock and Narik, and their Lounds, of course," she concluded. And it was after this that Leonard and Anmar for the first time saw the Queen in her role of commander, and it was truly impressive. Calling on Scribe Allen to take notes, whilst making some notations herself on the sheaf of writing sheets in front of her, she started issuing clear and precise instructions, as fast as Allen could write. No detail escaped her notice. As had been previously discussed, the departure date for the expedition was set for 2 moons hence, to allow the winter to recede in the lower fastnesses, so that their arrival there would coincide with full summer, freezing cold as that would still be. They decided to use End Village as their home base. This was basically a work camp, not in residential use, and literally the last village in the far western part of the bamboo forests. The track on which the final tunnel-stealing attack had taken place led off from this very camp. Sufficient food, general supplies, medicaments, some tents, as well as cold weather supplies and protective clothing, were to be sent off immediately, along with the usual staff complement to set up and maintain the camp while they were using it. "I will need these to go within 2 days, Allen, so get Quartermaster Van Rock to come and see me immediately after luncheon today, please." The Queen thought for a moment. "In view of the circumstances, we possibly need some of our armed people to go along with them. Thomas and Nellan, can you find 5 of your handlers and their Lounds ready to go in 2 days' time? And on more mature reflection, I want a few crossbow specialists among them as well." Both Major Tarek and her commanding officer nodded. "No problem, Your Highness. They will be ready," Nellan Tarek confirmed. "Good," the Queen responded. "And Count Edo, can you and Major Ram do the same? Also with an archer or 2 included, if possible." They likewise responded affirmatively, to the Queen's obvious satisfaction. Then her brow creased lightly in thought. "Paydam, and how far will the Lounds be able to hunt for their own food, do you think?" she asked. Councillor Paydam considered for a few seconds. "There are fairly large numbers of forest hares, also those large rodents that feed on the young bamboo shoots, and the little forest deer around there, Your Highness, but they tend to keep to the warmer areas. Even in high summer, the far western high-lying areas of the bamboo forest can still be very cold. The little white-tailed roe deer in particular are very elusive, and I would think that there might not be sufficient time for the Lounds to hunt." The last part of the councillor's statement carried the intonation of a question. After a moment's thought, the Queen nodded decisively. "You are right, Paydam, so we will have to take sufficient food for the Lounds as well," she said, and made a swift notation to that effect. Turning to her senior scribe again, she continued, "I will also need to send off at least 4 fast couriers at first light tomorrow, Allen. Arrange for Raft and Glenna and Petra and Selk to see me this afternoon as well, so that I can give them their instructions. Amongst other things, we must inform all the way stations on our route to arrange to have sufficient fodder, supplies, and replacement horses for us, so they must make timeous arrangements with their local suppliers. They must also get extra dray horses in case the supply wagons need replacements. The Queen rubbed her chin thoughtfully. Oh, and Count Edo and Colonel Malek, we will need a medic from each of your people to go along as well. And I will want to personally see their supplies on the day we leave. We will not run out of essential medical supplies this time. A grim note crept into the Queen's voice as she said this. We will also need at least one surgeon for the animals. No, better take 2. Count Edo, can you spare one of yours for the horses? And I will get Surgeon Dell to let us have one of her senior assistants for the Lhounds. They often help with our horses as well. The Queen held out her hand to Scribe Alan. Let me have a look at your calendar, please, Alan. As he handed over the thick tablet of rush parchment, the Queen studied it for a moment, then said, Is everybody agreed, then, that we set our departure date for the 17th day of the moon of Cadiz? That gives us just 2 days less than 2 full moons to prepare, which should be ample. General sounds and nods of approval signified everybody's agreement. Minute it to that effect, then, please, Alan. Queen Neruda sat back in her chair and looked at everybody around the table in turn. Can anybody think of anything else that we have omitted to give attention to, or want to raise? As nobody seemed to have anything to add, the Queen started rising to her feet, but then sat down again. Oh, there is one thing that I want to stress. Decide soon, please, on the people you are taking along on this expedition, and then start them training immediately. I do not want out-of-condition handlers, Lhounds, and militia men or women slowing us down. As those of you who have travelled with me know, Tempest and I do not like to dawdle. Councillors Admeta and Paden gave heartfelt groans and said, We know, Your Highness, we know. And Governor Demito said even more feelingly, Never again, Neruda, never again. I am no longer that young boy you grew up with. Queen laughed and smilingly got to her feet, but then quickly sat down again and gestured to some of the others who had followed her example to also be seated again. She clicked her tongue, and here I go forgetting one of the most important things. She shook her head in irritation at herself. Count Edo and Major Ram, we will obviously need those militia trackers that followed the trail towards the snow line. Please see that they are included in the militia contingent. Major Ram gave his superior a swift glance, then said, Oh, Your Highness, I fear we have a problem there. 2 of the trackers were brothers, and they both applied for home leave when they came back from their tour of duty in the Bamboo Forests. They should have been back half a moon ago already. I received word a few days ago that they had both been killed in a rafting accident in the rapids just above Brownwater Lake, where they had apparently gone on their vacation. Count Edo added as Major Ram fell silent, I mentioned it in my latest report, Your Highness, which should reach your desk early tomorrow. It is being copied by my scribes as we speak. The Queen frowned and looked searchingly at both of them. That is indeed very, very bad news in every way. Their parents know, presumably? Count Edo shook his head. No, ma'am, their parents are both deceased, and they have no other relatives as far as we know. The Queen sat quietly for a few seconds, obviously perturbed by the news. And the other tracker, Major Ram? She then asked. She is here, Your Highness, but I am afraid that she is not well. She has been in and out of the infirmary ever since her return from their tour of duty. Our senior medic is just about at his wit's end. He thinks that she picked up some contagion in the forests, but he cannot pin it down. She keeps running these high temperatures, then she gets better and apparently feels relatively well for some days, and then the whole pattern repeats itself. Major Ram looked really concerned as he imparted this news. He shook his head doubtfully as he added, I do not think that she will be able to start training with us very soon, I'm afraid. The Queen absorbed this further bad news in pensive silence. This is not good at all, she eventually said slowly. Then she did rise to her feet, soon to be followed by everybody else. She thanked them all for their time, then walked them to the door. As she took her courteous leave of everybody who had attended the meeting, it was nonetheless clear that her mind was troubled by the bad news with which the otherwise positive meeting had been concluded. It was nevertheless also clear that her mind was similarly already fully engaged with the work that lay ahead.